Hello to the audience of the online conference. I'm very happy today to introduce a special guest to you. He's actually broadcasting from Hawaii, so we should rather say aloha to Biff Mithöfer. Very happy to have you. Biff teaches yin yoga teacher trainings and workshops internationally, so he's also sometimes in Germany. He's a 500E Yoga Alliance registered teacher and has trained and taught extensively with Don and Amber Stapleton and has studied yin yoga and anatomy with Paul Greeley. Biff has also studied shamanism with teachers of the Shipibo tradition of Eastern Peru and is a student of cross-cultural shamanism as taught by Angeles Arien. Biff is the author of the Yin Yoga Kit and co-author of the Therapeutic Yoga Kit. Welcome, Biff. It's a pleasure to have you on the Yoga Online Conference.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Perfect.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Okay, so Biff, just as a starter, would you please be so kind as to say a few words about yourself, how you came to yoga, and maybe a brief introduction, what is yoga for you? What's your interpretation of yoga?
Sure. Well, I was a child of the late 60s and early 70s. And my first memory of recognition of yoga was I was at the Woodstock Festival, and Satchidananda opened the festival, and I was 17 at the time. And it was that really impressed me. And then by 1971, I was living in a commune, and that's the year Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, came out. So it was a time of real spiritual exploration. And I became interested in yoga and spiritual traditions. And as I look back at it, it's quite interesting that many of my friends went to ashrams or went to India or other ways of spiritual practices. Whereas many of us were faced at that time in the U.S. with a lot of social injustice. We were in the midst of a war in Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. So the spirituality to us became a question of how do we learn better to take care of each other? How do we stop these wars? How do we take care of the earth? How do we end the segregation? We were asking, how do we use the message of love that John Lennon was giving us, the message that Ram Dass was talking to us about? How do we use that really to help each other? And my life then changed, and my wife and I built a small house in Vermont and homesteaded there, and that's where I still live. And so I spent a number of years reconnecting to the earth and running my own business and raising a family. And then about 20 years ago, I stopped all that and went back into my inquiries in the more spiritual traditions. And that's when I began to study with the shamanic traditions in Peru and elsewhere. And then that has just developed into my yoga teaching. So my yoga teaching is really an offshoot of all of these adventures in my life. And certainly a lot of it is driven by my view that we need to make social and environmental changes. And that comes through spirituality. And for me, it's not the other way around.
Okay. So since you're quite a very experienced yogi, so to say, could you give us some interpretation of yourself about yoga? So what is yoga for you in your life, and how could it be explained to someone which is not so into yoga as you are?
Yeah. Well, for me, sometimes the definition that we sometimes use of yoga, which is this practice to bring things back together, to yoke things, for me, that's missing really the deep truth, which is the fact that there's nothing that is apart.
Mm-hmm.
The practice of yoga is not the effort to bring things back together. It's only the realization that nothing needs to be brought together. It's the realization that we are whole as we are, that we have a place in the universe, a place on earth. For me, that's the essence of yin yoga, whether it's practiced on a mat in India, whether it's practiced in the desert someplace else, or it's practiced in our homes. For me, that's the essence of it. It's the realization that, in fact, we actually are okay.
Okay, that's interesting. Perfect. So, just right before we start diving a little bit deeper into that topic, something I didn't mention in the introduction, but I did recognize, of course, that you are also somehow, let's say, a proactive humanitarian person, and that you founded the Jamse Sponsorship Project, which supports Tibetan refugee children, I believe. Could you please introduce this as well a little bit to the audience and tell us something about it, what it is? Because I've considered it very interesting, and in terms of the of your experience which you made in building bridges in the between humans and between cultures. That's kind of interesting to me.
Well, it started, I think, in 1997. My wife and I went to hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama speak in New York City, and leaving the hall, we signed up to sponsor a Tibetan child. Mm-hmm. And we became more and more interested in that, and we realized that, of course, although it sounds kind of cliche-ish, the children are who we need to be supporting. Mm-hmm. And for me, the teaching of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, although I'm not a Buddhist, but his teaching and the teaching of the Buddhists is so needed in the world today that from my point of view, preserving the Tibetan culture is very important. Mm-hmm. Supporting and maintaining this culture that believes in nonviolence and believes in interconnectedness. And to preserve that culture, we need to preserve the children's future. We need to be sure that the Tibetan children don't end up just fighting for their lives to survive, that they can practice their religion or their practices, and that they can keep influence of the world. So I've been very lucky that been able to do that. And really, it was my wife Amy's heart that was the driving force. So as it is now, all of the profit from my teaching and my writing goes to the Jamse Sponsorship Program. And what we do is support Tibetan children and often their families, because it doesn't do any good to educate children if they don't have a decent place to live or clothes or food. We also give money to the Tibetan Department of Education occasionally to help them bring their children home for vacation. And so it's been successful. We're fully funded through 2016, and we have a reserve in the bank. And what really touches me sometimes, and I often don't talk about it, but some of the money, for instance, is going to bring Tibetan children home to see their families. Some of these children hadn't been home for 3 years, children as young as 6 or 7 years old. And through the work of people coming to the trainings and the classes, that money goes straight through. And I often think, as I'm sitting in the circle, how because of the effort of the people who come to the classes and all the effort we make together, some little Tibetan child is coming home for the first time in 3 years.
That's amazing.
So for me, I feel very lucky because my path is clear ahead of me. Mm-hmm. I believe in what I'm teaching, and I believe in the support of these children. So I just do the best I can to accomplish both those things. Yeah. So that's the Jamse. And the name Jamse was given to us by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2006. And Jamse means kindness in Tibet.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very kind work, and it's very much appreciated. So, wow, I'm truly amazed what you're doing. That's really nice, really nice.
I think I hear this often. Oh, the work you're doing is so wonderful. Yes. But the fact is, it's all I can do.
Yeah,
It, because of my personal work, or because of the miracle of my parents and who I am, it doesn't feel like I'm giving something. These children are praying for us every day.
Mm.
Who's getting the good deal here? It's not. It's certainly not. Sure, we're giving them some money and we're working for them, but they're sending a love to us, and they're sending the love to the world, and that's way more than I'm giving them. So
Oh yeah.
I don't think of it as a gift to them. I think of it really as a blessing to me.
Yeah, that's very interesting to think about, because we don't even realize it, what you just said. So that these people are praying for us, that they are praying for the world, and we
Exactly.
should give something back. So just in terms of having an energy exchange, and and being just kind as you are as a person. That's truly amazing.
Well, I know that they're Tibetans who understand what Jamte is about, and they are praying for every student that's gone through every training, every class, for all of us, and as you say, for the world.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. And how could one yet outside of this project contribute to it? So just for me to understand, how could I contribute to this project? What are the possibilities for me?
Okay, one of the things that makes Jamte different than the amazing work that the Tibet House and Campaign for Tibet and those beautiful institutions are doing is that we pledge for each student for their whole schooling.
Mm-hmm.
The first girl that I spoke about that we signed up with in 97, is now in her second year at Amherst College with a scholarship. And Amherst is one of the best northeastern universities in the U.S. And so she's come straight from Dharamsala, India, and that's taken these almost 15 years of supporting her and being there with her. And she was at our house in Vermont for Christmas this year for the first time. So it's not easy to donate small sums, because what we do is we pledge for 10 years per child. And we do have people who donate larger sums and take those into account. We also have teachers, wonderful teachers in France and Sweden and other places who are teaching yin yoga, who are my students who are teaching yin yoga trainings, and they also are dedicating part of the money to children. Jamse doesn't just help Tibetan children. This year, we branched out because of the earthquake in Nepal, and so we were able to put a considerable amount of money into the Save the Children's Nepalese Earthquake Relief Fund in the spring. And all that happens because so many people are trying to make a difference in the world. And the first way they're doing it is they're coming to yoga teacher training. They're coming to class. And it's important. Just that they come, that makes a difference in it.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I truly wanted to touch upon this point, because it introduces you quite well, better than I did. So so it shows actually what you are, a giving person you are, and that's truly amazing. So great. So the next point I did touched upon in the introduction, though, was that you've also been studying shamanism, and for me it's a very interesting topic, and I want to learn a little bit more on that. Could you give me just a brief overview what you're doing there, and why, and how does it contribute to your life?
Certainly. As I mentioned earlier, in the last 20 years, I've been studying or working these traditions. One thing I notice is we often attach a particular culture to shamanic tradition. And having contact with different traditions, what I see when I look overall, the common point that runs through them is the understanding of the role of the shaman. Mm-hmm. Now, the word shaman is shamanism. It's like the people use Zen or the words years ago, just use the word, even though it doesn't really have much meaning to it. But so I think shamanism and shaman those words have been used, and kind of the meaning may be diluted a bit. Mm-hmm. And I can only speak from my own experience and my own opinion. But from my own experience, what the real true role of the shaman is, when we take away all the trappings, sometimes even superstition, all these roles that the shaman may present. What's left is the role of the shaman being the role not of someone who leads you to a place, or even someone who guides you, but merely someone who opens the gate so that you can find your own path. Now, this sounds simple, but this takes a person having done their own work. Mm-hmm. Because in order to do that, we have to let our ego step out of the way. I often think myself, that when I'm most grounded and most whole is when my ego and I share the same sense of humor. But so this idea of allowing people to find their own path takes a teacher who is willing to get out of the way. So people ask, is yoga a shamanic practice? Well, it certainly can be. It's up to the teacher. Mm-hmm. If we feel that we have the answer, that we know everything, that we're going to guide or push or lead our students in a certain direction, then that's a whole different way of seeing shamanism, and that may be a way some people see it. Mm-hmm. But for me, and this is the way I teach, the more I can get out of the way of the person's own personal path, the more I feel that I'm helping. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I think that when we're willing to do our own work, when we're willing to come to some understanding with our own ego, then we can step out of the way and trust that our students find their own way. Mm-hmm. Because the opposite of trust is control. Mm-hmm. So as teachers, we move between this place of control and the place of trust, between the place of dictatorship and the place of anarchy. And somewhere we have to find a place, a balance for the students. But it's very easy for our egos to push us into the side of control. Okay. So that's really what has led me to be teaching the way I am. We teach now 3 Yin teacher training modules. The first module, the Yin Yoga, Taoism, sequencing, and is about the basics of Yin Yoga, anatomy, the energy systems, how the postures are presented, and things like that, more technical aspects. But as we move into the second and third module, then it becomes about our personal growth. So the second module that I teach, which is called The Essence of Yin Yoga, begins to expand and look at the archetypes of the warrior, the healer, the teacher, and the visionary from an indigenous point of view, and to see where we are in balance in our life. Because the shaman really falls in the place of the West, the place of the teacher. But the teacher needs the heart of the healer. It needs the strength of the warrior, and it needs a vision of the visionary in order to be complete. So if we put all our attention in how do we teach and not how do we show up as whole human beings, then we never can be in a place where we can really create and hold space for our students, which for me is the shamanic path. So I think it's the shamanic way is open to everyone. It doesn't have anything to do necessarily with healing. It has to do with holding and opening space for people to have their experience.
Okay.
And if you go, a lot of my teaching now is what we are calling Yin Yoga Journeys, which really combines my experience in the circles that shamanic circles I've worked in with my yoga. And we do what practices in circles with drumming and poetry and almost no instruction. So and often by candlelight in the dark. So for me, these are shamanic journeys that we go on ourselves. And for me, yoga can be a shamanic journey. It could be a gym class. It can be a Donald Trump rally, or it can be something that has to do with our own path. But for me, I've had people say to me, Yin Yoga is a practice not for beginners. It's a practice for experienced or advanced students. Well, I actually think that Yin Yoga is a practice for advanced teachers, but not for advanced students. It's a practice for any student. But to truly engage, to truly be a Yin teacher, you need to be able to step out of the way and create space. This is just my point of view, as everything I say here today, and I want to make that clear. I'm not pushing an agenda. It's just my own
Absolutely.
experience.
Yeah. Very nice put. Thanks for sharing your opinion. Yeah.
Sure.
So you already talked about Yin Yoga and yoga as well. So just getting a step back, would you please give us some insights about your yoga lineage, please? What's your yoga lineage?
Certainly. Well, it's a very interesting question, and you may be getting the impression that my views of yoga, of the term yoga, are maybe broader than some people's. It doesn't really mean the practice of yoga. It means our realization of what yoga means. So for me to say what is my lineage, well, I can say I was very fortunate to be trained in Hatha Yoga by Don Stapleton and Amba Stapleton, and as an interdisciplinary teacher, and I still teach for their facility now, Yin segments for their trainings. But when I was at the Dalai Lama's house, my wife Amy and I, at his house in 2006, he gave us the name Jamse, which, as I've explained, means kindness. It actually means joy and care. Are the two words that make up the word kindness in Tibet. And the Dalai Lama often says, my religion is kindness. And so he gave us the name. We said, please give us a name for our project. And he said, okay, well, the name should be Jamse Project. And he told us how it meant kindness. And we said, well, you often say your religion is kindness. Where did you learn kindness? And this is a man, remember, who was taken from the age of 5 and educated by the highest Buddhist monks. And he said, I learned it from my mother. He said, my mother would let me sit on her shoulders and I'd pull one ear. If I wanted to go to the right, I'd pull the right ear. If I wanted to go to the left, he said, one time I pulled so hard her ear was bleeding. And he laughed and he said, but you know what? She never said anything. He said, that's where I learned kindness. So when you ask me, what is my yoga lineage? I first have to ask myself, what does it mean to me? Yes, I've been very fortunately trained in anatomy by Paul Greeley and by very highly trained teachers. But the essence of my teaching comes from someplace else. And I actually think it comes more from my mother and my father than from any place else, because the essence of my teaching is about acceptance and unconditional love. It's not about the postures. So it's an interesting question. And I think it's interesting for us all to step back and say, really, where's our lineage from? I also think there's a danger in attaching to a lineage and saying, this man who lived 1,000 years ago told me what life should be like, and I still believe it. Well, maybe not. Maybe you ought to figure out for yourself what life is about, and then read the old guy's book. Anyway, so it's an interesting question, and I don't feel the same attachment to yoga lineage that I hear from a lot of teachers, and maybe that's my loss, and maybe not.
Okay.
Just like the way my life has been.
Okay. Thanks for that. So, my next question would actually be which person or which philosophies have had the most impact on you? And I kind of feel a little bit that's a little bit needless to ask, but I want to ask it anyway. So,
Well, it's an interesting question. I would say, first of all, maybe we step back and say, okay, what does this really mean?
yeah.
Because one of the things I think that's very important now, and we do have 3 modules trainings. The third module is called Yin Yoga and Storytelling, because every word we use carries a story, including the word philosophy. So what does that really mean to us? Well, it's a way of explaining someone's experience of what it means to be human. And that's great. For me, the Taoist traditions of Lao Tzu and Cheng Tzu most easily and clearly explain my own experience. That's very different than saying Lao Tzu explains what life is. No, Lao Tzu speaks to my experience of life, and that's important. I don't want to be given a philosophy. It's very helpful for me to have something to have someone else help me explain what I feel. But when it really comes down to who the teachers are, I lean much more towards the indigenous nature cultures than I do the classic Hindu or Indian cultures. So if you say, well, how do I understand interconnectedness? If I was a Buddhist, I might say, well, the Buddha taught me. If I was a Christian, I might say one thing or another. Well, I will say to you, I go down to the ocean and I look at the waves, and they look separate to me. But if I look long enough, I realize that, in fact, they're all completely connected. In fact, they're all the same ocean. I sit and I look at the trees, and I see that when it rains, the trees turn green, and the soil happens, and the leaves fall. Those are the lessons of impermanence, of interconnectedness, and they're written all around us. We don't have to go to some book written 5,000, 2,000 years ago to tell us that, in fact, we exist because the trees exist. I exist because you exist. These things are observable. So for me, philosophy can be a beautiful way to explain my experience, what I observe around me. But if someone tells me, if I read a book that says everyone's interconnected, and the next day the bestseller says, guess what, nobody's interconnected, I don't know what to believe. But if I look at the ocean, it's always the same. So for me, philosophy is a way of teaching or speaking of experience. If you ask me who my teachers really are, and father were very important. My father was a physician and professor of medicine and a healer, and my mother was completely accepting and loving to me. And so those teachers, and I was blessed to have a life partner for over 40 years, and she is still teaching me about unconditional love and acceptance. So maybe I have a different view of who my teachers have been, some yoga teachers, but I think in the end it's all the same. We have to, no matter what someone tells us the truth is, we have to continually look back at ourselves. And that's why my teaching is the way it is. Why my objective is to create space, not to fill it.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing answers. Thank you very much for that. So you already mentioned your teachings, and now I'm really thrilled to know which kind of practice do you teach and how do you teach, and what is Yin Yoga all about. Please give me just a brief introduction, and I want to know more.
It's always just to ask if people brief any. I'll try. I teach exclusively now in the trainings and workshops I often combined. I often work with a more young teacher. The reason I'm teaching in yoga is because as a hot yoga teacher, when I found this practice that Paul Greeley had introduced, it was it became or felt like it was part of my existing practice. Mm-hmm. And I hear this a lot from yin teachers and students. It's a matter of identification. So Paul has given many of us a way of naming and looking at a practice that we're naturally drawn to. And yin yoga, I think, is really, I know it's based on really ancient practices. This is not a new thing. This is really, the new things are things that have come between the ancient practices. And yin yoga, in order to really understand what it is, we have to understand what yin means. And this is a little bit like Zen and shamanism and all this stuff. You know, when you hear people say, oh, that was really Zen, or that was really, that's really yin or something, or yang. It's important to really understand what that means. And to do that, we have to go back to what really is the core and base of Taoism. And without going into long explanation, from a Taoist point of view of the world, there exists something which lies beyond existence, which is called the Tao. And this is both everything and nothing. It is that which came before anything. It's that which will be here after everything. But from that place of nothingness, from the place of inherent nothingness, came the manifestation of the whole cosmos, the universe. And from a Taoist point of view, all that is manifested in the universe holds this apparent duality of yin and yang. So yin and yang are not are only terms of relationship. Nothing is either yin or yang. The whole universe and cosmos is in this relationship. As Brian Swim, a physicist, advanced physicist, said, the universe is not a collection of objects, it's a communion of subjects. Mm-hmm. All of the universe is in this relationship, and this relationship is explained through the archetypes of yin and yang. And if we look at it from a physical point of view, we would say the yang parts of nature, the yang parts of ourselves, are those parts that are deeper to the core of the body, those parts of ourselves which are more rigid and harder, the parts of ourselves which are which need less movement. And so those parts are the yin parts of ourselves. The yang parts of ourselves from a physical point of view are those parts of ourselves which move us into the world, which strive, which push. In other words, the muscles. Mm-hmm. So if we look within the physical aspects of the body, we see this balance of yin and yang between the muscles that move us and the connective tissue and the bones and the deep tissue, which in a way holds us together. So yin yoga then, from a physical point of view, is a practice that's aimed at these more yin parts of the body. In other words, the parts between the knees and the navel, essentially. The joints of the hips, the joints of the lower back. Now, again, yin is a relative term. So you can only say the more yin parts of the body. So, yes, the center of the body is more yin, but that doesn't mean it's yin. Mm-hmm. It's more yin than the yang parts. So, in other words, it's all relative. So in that way, essentially, we can't really define yin as being separate from yang. Mm-hmm. But for the point of view of understanding the practice itself, perhaps we can. So it's defined as, we can define it as this practice which is aimed at the more yin parts of the body. But if we look at it from an emotional point of view, it's this balance of striving and acceptance. Mm-hmm. Our yang nature is that part that goes out in the world. We need to make changes. We need to do things. We need to move. And this is very important, of course. We have children starving in the world. We have the earth that needs saving. This takes effort and takes a certain amount of striving. But on the other side of that is the balance of acceptance, this balance between striving and acceptance. And in our world today, I see the world push way towards the yang part. In other words, nothing is exactly right. We have to change things. We have to be better. You have to get more money. You have to get a better car. All these things around dissatisfaction and non-acceptance. So the reason I was really drawn to yin, and the reason I continue to be drawn to it, is because I feel that the importance of the practice of acceptance and equanimity is so important in the world today. We also have this feminine masculine side, yin being our feminine nature and yang being our more masculine nature. And these aspects of ourselves in the world need to be in balance. When the yang nature becomes out of balance, the world becomes aggressive, and compassion is lost. And that's where we see ourselves so much in the world. On the same hand, if we don't balance our yin nature with our yang nature, then maybe we're completely accepting, but we can't get out and do our work in the world. So we need this balance. So I'm drawn to yin because of that need for balance in the world. Mm-hmm. The physical portions are important, but my particular passion is towards our understanding of balance, compassion, acceptance, and those aspects of our life.
That's very, very interesting. One question which came into my mind is when it comes to balancing yin and yang parts in ourselves. For my understanding, it could be really difficult because we are in the Western Hemisphere. We are more in this kind of yang structure, and so we are living a yang life in the first place. And how could we have this balance? So balance would mean 50% that, 50% this, but that's not possible in today's world. So mainly in the Western Hemisphere. Could you give us some advice on how to bring more balance in that space?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be when we. It doesn't necessarily be 50%. It has to be appropriate to what's happening. Sometimes we shift much more into our yang nature, and sometimes we shift into our yin nature. But these shifts need to be appropriate to the situation. You know, if an animal is chasing you at high speeds, it's not really appropriate to go into a walking meditation. It's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
That's the time for yang. However, there are different times for different aspects of ourselves. I think that yin practice, meditation, is very helpful to help us come into balance. I think that there's a big shift happening on the earth in that way anyway, and I think we're seeing it. For me, one of the most important things about yin practice and how it's growing in the world, because it's growing very fast. The Yin Yoga Kit was the second book written about Yin Yoga, right after Paul Greeley's had been written a few years before. Now there's something like 5 books published in Germany alone. It's growing very fast. I think it's happening because we're making a shift. If we look back 10,000 years or more ago, we see that the world was controlled, or not controlled, the world was influenced by creation, by the goddess cultures. That began to shift as we moved out of the first and second chakras into this place of fire, of the yang effort and yang striving. And this is where we are now. And I really believe that we are in a place now where we're poised to move from the third chakra and back to the heart. We're poised to move from the patriarchal systems of control of the world into the balanced system. Maybe we move into a more goddess way of seeing things, more compassionate way of seeing things. But this shift has to happen. We have to let go of this hanging on to aggression and yang nature, and we have to open into our yin nature. And that's why I think people are coming to yin classes. And that's why I think the world is shifting. The world is moving away from aggression, and it's moving back towards acceptance. Maybe I'm naive, and maybe I'm just overly hopeful, but I do believe it, and that's what I see in the yoga. And that's, to me, what's important.
I do believe it too, to be honest. Yeah. Um, okay, so just for me to understand, how does Yin Yoga practice, or rather a Yin Yoga class, look like? So when I get into a class, what can I expect? So is it mainly a physical exercise, or is it most of the time meditation? And could you give some insights about it?
Well, one thing that's very interesting about Yin Yoga is that it has no guru. It has no copyright.
Mm-hmm.
We were very blessed by having someone like Paul Greeley in the very early stages of the development of this practice. And this is a teacher who is not driven by his ego, who did not try to possess something, even though it was largely his creation. So he's always said, and I don't own this practice. Here it is. Do what you want of it. Mm. I've never been to a Yin Yoga teacher training. There weren't any when I started doing it. It was just Paul was doing training, Sarah Powers on the West Coast, and some others, Bernie Clark, and some others. The beauty of that is that this is a long answer to say, the beauty of that is I don't know what you'll find in your Yin class, because it depends on the teacher. And I train teachers, or I teach from a point of view of acceptance and meditation. Many teachers teach from a much more point of view of the physical aspects of the practice. Some teachers much more on the energetic. They talk much more about the energy lines of the body. So one of the beauties of it is it's not controlled. You won't go to a Yin class in one city and find the same Yin class in another city. It's not McDonald's. It's the teacher. And so people who have trained with me maybe have if it works for them, have a different outlook than someone trained with another teacher. And all of these things are important. Because I am more interested in the emotional aspect, does not by any means make it more important than any of the other aspects. So one beauty of this practice is that you can go train with someone like Paul, who's talking a lot about anatomy. And then you can train with someone like Sarah, who's talking about meditation. Bernie Clark talks about very specific technical aspects and about other aspects. Or you can train with me, and I talk about those, but mainly about the emotional and those aspects. So teachers who are drawn towards one aspect will teach from that point of view, and who are drawn from another will teach from another. We have an airplane going.
It was a big one.
A moment of silence. But it holds a danger, because if teachers are not properly trained, then they don't understand the deep essence of this practice, which is the understanding of the relationship of yin and yang. So there's a danger of when we don't control things, it can go off track. There's a greater danger of when we control them too tightly, because they don't ever go on track, I guess you could say. So I can't tell you what you'll find, but essentially, from my point of view, if you come to one of my classes, there'll be very little instruction. I'll shift you from one posture to the other. Generally, we have assistants that are looking in case someone needs some help for some reason. We also have, from my classes, normally drumming or some live music and poetry. I recite poetry. I don't give instruction, but I do recite poetry. So in my class, it would be basically an hour and a half of body meditation. And one of the aspects that's so powerful about Yin is, unlike seated meditation, which is hugely powerful practice, we're now involving the deep tissue of the body in that meditation. I believe very strongly that the body holds the stories of our life and our past lives. And many of those stories, especially the trauma, are held deep in the tissues of the body. And when we put ourselves into these postures where we bring attention to those deep places of the body, the hips, the lower back, then we have a chance to let some light come in on that trauma. At the same time, we get some light come in on the joy, because yin exists because of yang. Joy only exists because of trauma. Trauma only exists because of joy.
Mhm.
So when we go deep, look deep in the body, we see both the joy and the trauma, and there we can access that.
Mhm.
And that happens in the deep body meditations of the practice of.
Okay. See. Okay. Perfect. So
It's a try.
yeah. It sounds very, very attracting to me, honestly. And in preparation for this interview, obviously I did look up your website, and I saw that one pillar of your teacher trainings is storytelling. Is this meant with what you just said, reciting poetry, or is it something else? I read about it, and I wanted to ask you what it is exactly. Storytelling.
I believe that storytelling is the most of all the healing, most ancient. I believe the great teachers, Buddha, Jesus, Chung Tzu, Lao Tzu, taught in parable. They taught in stories.
Mm-hmm.
When we receive a fact, it comes in as a fact, and it processes in the brain. When you tell someone a story, it goes into the soul. It comes into the heart. It's held in a very different way. So part of what the yin yoga and storytelling is about is partly it's about understanding classic storytelling. Because if we look at classic storytelling, we see it runs through the aspects of the youth story, which is about triumphing and fighting to find our way and identify ourselves. Through the midlife stories, which talk about how do we fought and we pulled the sword out of the stone, and now we got the sword, but it's not so much fun as we thought. Or we kissed the prince and the frog, and he turned into a prince, but now we find he doesn't put the top back on the toothpaste tube anymore. As Joseph Campbell says, we get to the top of the ladder and we find out it's up against the wrong wall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the midlife story. All of a sudden we find that what we've been doing isn't satisfying us in the way we thought it would. In other words, our attachment or anticipation hasn't been met. Then we move to the elder stories, which are about transcendence, because we understand in this path that no matter how much yoga we do, no matter how much good food we eat, we're going to die. We're going to get sick. Somebody close to us is going to die or get sick. The question is, what do you do when that happens? And that's for me, that's the question of yoga, essentially, or the more important question of yoga. What do you do when all your effort doesn't get the results you need? Then you have to transcend that. And that's the role of the elder. Now, all these three parts of ourselves play intermittently throughout our life. Maybe we're 5 years old and we're in an elder story. If you were born as a young soldier in in Africa someplace, I forget where you would be born into an elder story. So it's not age related. So this is part of our development. Are we stuck in this story of the ego of the youth, or can we actually understand that it's possible to transcend those things? Mm-hmm. The teachings of the elder apply to every age. So part of it, that training is again, what is happening with our personal development? Are we stuck in a story that no longer serves us? Mm-hmm. Or is there a healing story that we need to open to? Are we carrying a drama that we need to let go of? Is this story, are we ready to let go of this story? But for me, it's also very important that we understand that, in fact, we're in a story, and that our teaching story is unfolding around us all the time. And when we pay attention and we're mindful, then we learn from our own experience, as I spoke earlier. And when we open to the possibility of story, and that's what so much of the indigenous cultures speak about. When we open to the possibility of story, then we open to the story of the waves. We open to the story of the sky and the rain and the trees, the stories of the truth of what it means to be human. So it's really, the training is really about how do we how do we teach in a different way? How do we not tell people what to do, but how do we give them stories that allow them to see a possibility, not to push them, but to see a possibility. Also, how do we see in our life where we're stuck in our own story? So it's been very interesting. I teach about 2 of those a year, and it's been fascinating and hugely powerful. We hear some stories that come for people have been holding for their life that come out, and it's amazing what stories of healing and what stories of trauma people are carrying in their bodies. Mm. And that's part of what Yin Yoga is addressing. So that's part of why we talk about storytelling. I'm much more of a storyteller than I'm a teacher. I'm actually more interested in story than fact. Yeah. That's what that's about.
Yeah, very interestingly put. Thank for that. So now I'm very interested in it, and I would really appreciate to have some advice for you to maybe to integrate some parts of your teachings into my daily practice, or when I go to bed tonight. So actually it is tonight now, so when I go to bed later, or when I get up in the morning tomorrow, what can I do in order to integrate these kind of things into my day-to-day life? Do you have some advice for me and for the viewers as well, please?
I actually have very. I'll give you one. Well, I have some things which guide me, mm-hmm. and it's something which I say to teachers over and over. And I often say, if you write one thing down in this teaching, write this down. And that is, if you have time for 4 postures, do 3. Mm-hmm. Now that sounds like it applies just to yoga, doesn't it? And in Yin Yoga, you see, we're leading people through a certain number of postures, and they're held maybe for 5 minutes or more apiece. So as we're leading the class, and for me as a teacher, I don't plan the class. It unfolds with the poetry and the postures and the music unfold the journey. We take a journey together. I don't know what's going to happen until I sit down. But what I've learned over the years is as the time goes by, as a teacher, you say, okay, I have 40 minutes left, 30 minutes left, so I have time for 4 more postures. It's in your mind, how long a posture takes. Well, my lesson to myself is if you have time for 4 postures, do 3. Take a breath, relax, and step back a little. Now, I've been saying that for 10 years, probably, in teacher trainings. This spring, I was in, this fall, I'm planning finalizing my 2016 schedule. And I was scheduled for 2 trainings back-to-back in Greece, and then 2 days between them, 2 trainings back-to-back in Sweden. Well, last year, I booked myself very tightly, and I was pledging that I wouldn't do that to myself this year. So I was troubled by it, and I was sitting there and I was thinking, this is too much. I'm doing it again. I've got 4 trainings scheduled right back to back. I'm sitting there. All of a sudden I said to myself, I've been telling people for 10 years, if you have time for 4, do 3. And I was like, I took a sigh of relief. I emailed the people and I canceled 1 training. And I said, wow, that's a pretty good idea. I've been telling, this is what teachers do. We get paid to learn ourselves. Is what we have. So finally, after 10 years, I finally listened to myself. Yeah. So if you have time for 4, do 3. But one of my guiding principles is leave early, walk slow. Mm-hmm. So if you want one guiding principle, maybe when you wake up tomorrow, leave early and walk slow. Mm-hmm. Take it easy. And I think that's, as far as a practice, for me, those are the small things that make a difference for me. Yeah. Of course, I do a yin practice and I do other practices, but as far as day-to-day life, how do I slow myself down? How do I take a breath? How do I be mindful? Those are the questions. Yeah. And one of them is I leave early and I walk slow. Not always. Yeah. I remember I was teaching I think in Asia or something. I was walking between classes down this dirt road, and one of the students came walking by me and fast by me, and she stopped. She said, "You know, I can't wait to get to be your age, so I can walk as slowly as you do." Just, well, it's not really age dependent. I just left on.
But that's actually a good advice to everyone. Just get up 10 to 15 minutes earlier, and then just slow down and breathe more than you do. Usually. Yeah, and you were talking a lot about yin postures, and I know, and you prepared something, kind of a surprise. So, how does a yin posture actually look like?
Well, yin posture essentially hatha yoga postures. But we use different names for them because there's a different intention behind them, and there's also a different way that we go, that we actually are in the posture, which is prompted by a different intention. So although the posture may be the same, we use a different name so it doesn't carry the story of the posture. You know, if we said, let's go into Jhana Sasana, everyone has a story of that from the hundreds of yoga classes they went to before. But if I use a different name, then we can start with a fresh story. So we use different names and we approach it slightly differently. And so what I thought we would do, I'm very lucky, a close friend of mine here on the island is a teacher and a physical therapist friend. So she has agreed to demonstrate just one posture, and we'll go into it first as though it was a yang posture, and then we'll come out and we'll go into it as though it's a yin posture. And maybe just we can see a few of the differences.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for that.
Understanding always that both yin and yang are necessary. We can't start doing our yang practices because we're doing yin, and the other way around. So because one posture is done one way for yin and another way for yang doesn't make either one right or wrong. Just makes them different. So we'd love to do that.
Yeah.
So how about if we take a short stop and we'll set up a mat, unless you had anything else you wanted to ask about?
No, that's fine. That's fine for me. We can make it just a short stop. That's okay.
Great. Yeah, because we'll set up.
Okay. It will be interesting.
So, stop.
Yeah.
Okay. See what we can do.
Hello. Hi.
Kevin, this is
see you.
Heather.
Nice to see you, Heather. Hi.
Why don't you sit on the mat and see what it... Yeah. All right, well, Maui. Oh, that's not so bad.
That's very nice. It's a nice.
Yeah, just a little tour. We have bananas, papaya, breadfruit, figs,
oh, wow.
limes, tomatoes, chocolate, etc.
Wow. Great.
Actually, probably sideways, probably better. Yeah, that's a good idea. Chickens. We have wild chickens, so if we get attacked, it could be serious. How's that view?
That's great. That's very great. Yeah. So shall I make a countdown? Countdown from 3. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So, Biff, will you explain what she's going to do?
I certainly will.
Okay.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Introduce.
Yeah.
My friend, fellow yoga physical therapist, Heather.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you. I just let me count down from 3 and then we can start. Right? Is that okay? Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Okay.
I want to introduce my friend Heather, who's a yoga teacher and physical therapist here on Maui.
Hi, Heather.
What we wanted to do was just give you an idea of what difference there is between doing a posture from a more yang point of view or from a more yin point of view. So Heather is first going to go into a forward bend. And if we were teaching this as a yin or guiding this as a yang class, as a hatha yoga class, we might do such things as ask her to engage her feet, flex the feet, engage the quads. We might ask her to engage the muscles of the lower back. So we're asking the muscles to become involved in the posture. So then we might say with a straight back, engaging the muscles of the back, lifting out of the pelvis and starting to come forward, bringing your hands, if you can, around the outside of your feet and keeping the back straight. So we might say this is a kind of classic hatha yoga posture. Now, of course, people do it for different reasons, certainly. Now, Heather is a physical therapist, so works with a lot of people here from a therapeutic point of view. Would you tell us, Heather, from a physical therapist point of view, why might you be leading someone into this posture?
As a physical therapist, I might utilize this posture for various reasons, all very dependent on the individual. But as a yoga teacher, one of the reasons I would use this posture would be to stretch the hamstrings on a stable base.
Great, thank you. So as you can see, there's a big difference between the way Heather practices as a physical therapist, because she's very highly trained and she teaches and practices very specifically to the individual for therapy. But as she said, as a yoga teacher, she might be doing this in order to stretch the hamstrings from this stable base. But if I was going to lead her through this as a yin posture, I would invite her, I would say, now Heather, without striving, please engage the back, the large muscles of the lower back, and letting yourself pull gently forward. Now, as you reach the full extent of your forward bend, let your back round and relax. Let your toes relax, relax your feet. If your feet want to turn outwards, that's fine. If they want to stay the way they are, that's fine. So I'm going to ask you, Heather, please don't try to get more deeply into the pose. Please don't pull or strive. Let your body find its own way. Let yourself rest in the posture. And so if we were doing this as a hatha yoga or yang posture, we might hold it for a minute or two. If we're doing it as a yin posture, we'll hold it for a good 5 minutes and maybe sometimes more. So my intention here as a yin posture is not the hamstrings at all. Remember, those are yang parts of the body. My intention here is to bring a gentle stretch into the lower back and into the hip flexors. Mm-hmm. So by letting her round her back, we engage the whole back and the deep connective tissue of that back. But the main thing I'm going to say to her over and over when I do say something in the yin posture is, please don't strive. Don't pull, don't think you have to be any different than you are in the posture right now. And if this was my class now, I might recite a poem, we might have some drumming, and we'd have some quiet.
I see. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ed. So, that's a very simple illustration of how the same posture might be approached from a different point of view, from a more yin or more yang.
Okay. I saw the difference. Absolutely. Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I want to say how I've been coming to Germany for the last 3 years or so, and we'll be in Munich, and it's it's great fun for me. I feel very much at home, and it's also a pleasure to be in a country where people pronounce my name better than I do. So
Perfect. And I have only one question left, which stayed in the back of my mind all the interview, and I just wanted to ask you, how is it to live in Hawaii? How is it?
Well, I'm very lucky. I spend about 3 months here and then I go back to teaching in May, and I teach steadily through December.
Yeah.
Then I'm home some. So here's where I swim, and I bike ride, and I eat properly, and I try not to be stressed. So
Okay,
it's great, actually.
Okay, so
Come on out.
yeah, so when I'm going to travel to Hawaii, I should travel in the first 3 months of the year, so that I can visit you, maybe. Perfect. Okay.
We'll see you next year.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds like a plan. Sorry, what did you say?
Or maybe we'll see you in Munich. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, perfect.
Hey.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the effort, and thanks for inviting Heather to show us the posture. It was very interesting to talk to you. A very nice discussion. Really appreciate that, and yeah, thanks so much. I have learned so much from your teachings and from your what you said is so interesting, and I think everyone should consider to do yin yoga, or maybe integrating it in its practice in his practice. That's very very nice topic, of course.
Good.
Thank you very much.
You can. Yeah. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah. Aloha to Hawaii.
Aloha.
Namaste.